It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Prince Andrew and the businessman accused of being a Chinese spy, as the King's brother says he cut contact and never discussed anything sensitive.
I'm very proud of the fact that I am sometimes considered a long-term friend of China's.
The Prince's links to China, the latest to lead to questions over his conduct. Also tonight. The celebrations unthinkable less than a week ago. We see the joy on the streets of Syria over the fall of President Assad. Making their retreat, the Russian forces appearing to withdraw from positions in Syria, the latest evidence of the changes on the ground. Plus, the challenge for the Chancellor to deliver economic growth after the evidence the economy shrank ahead of her budget. The promising World Cup draw for England and their new manager, but it's a mixed story for the other home nations. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Prince Andrew stepped back from public life more than 3 years ago, after the storm of allegations over his ties to the financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Tonight, the Prince made another rare intervention over another set of claims, this time regarding his relationship with a businessman accused of being a Chinese spy. That businessman has been barred from the UK on national security grounds, and the Duke of York's office said he had ceased all contact after the government raised concerns. Our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, reports.
He's now rarely seen, but Prince Andrew was once the public face of international trade, using his royal title to foster global relations and meet powerful leaders like China's President Xi Jinping.
I'm very proud of the fact that I am sometimes considered a long-term friend of China's.
But his close friendship with a Chinese businessman and alleged spy known only as H6 is raising awkward questions for the disgraced Duke. A court ruling this connection created a threat to national security.
The United Front's Works Department, which this individual appears to have been an actor, has regularly tried to influence academics and businesses and many others in the United Kingdom. But really getting all the way to the royal family demonstrates a level of intent that is really serious.
We know the individual was Andrew's business advisor, invited to his birthday party, and had won what was described as an unusual degree of trust from the senior royal. Court paperwork quotes a letter from Prince Andrew's senior advisor telling the man, "I also hope that it is clear to you where you sit with my principal and indeed his family. Outside of his closest internal confidence, you sit at the very top of a tree that many, many people would like to be on." Andrew's role as a trade envoy ended after his connections with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were exposed. After his fall from grace, there's been much speculation about the Duke's finances, including how he affords the upkeep of his large Windsor home, Royal Lodge. The Chinese embassy in London has hit back, accusing people in the UK of making up spy stories and creating trouble. And tonight, a response from Prince Andrew's office saying the Duke of York followed advice from His Majesty's government and ceased all contact with the individual after concerns were raised. The Duke met the individual through official channels, with nothing of a sensitive nature ever discussed. He is unable to comment further on matters relating to national security.
There's been no comment from Buckingham Palace because aides say Prince Andrew is no longer a working royal. But this a reminder his historic behaviour can still cause problems.
It is a diplomatic row, embarrassing and uncomfortable for the royal family. The King carrying on with his duties before Christmas, as his brother faces further scrutiny about his judgment and the company he kept. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Our correspondent Sadia Chowdhury is at Buckingham Palace for us tonight. And Sadia, this is a very rare intervention from Prince Andrew, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a member of the royal family who we now rarely hear from, as you say, but we seem to hear quite a lot about him. And when we do, it usually involves some sort of a public relations crisis for the royal family. A newspaper this evening is calling this Prince Andrew's never-ending fall from grace. Now, his statement is his first public comment since Thursday's development when judges upheld that decision to ban the individual known as H6 from entering the country. They argued that the Duke of York could be vulnerable to this person's influence. The Duke of York's comments, the statement that he made, he did so through his office, and it's a very short statement and it's very carefully worded. He says he followed government advice, that he met this contact through official channels and that no sensitive topics were ever discussed. So very carefully worded and a very short statement, but clearly one aimed at trying to distance himself from this individual. Nothing like that long, now infamous BBC Newsnight interview that he gave last time his friends and confidants were brought into question. But, you know, there's still a lot to be discussed. People will be asking questions about the prince's judgment when it comes to the people he allowed to be close to him.
Sadia, thank you. President Assad's rule over Syria only ended 5 days ago, but today his country was unrecognisable as hundreds of thousands of his former subjects took to the streets to celebrate his fall in what they called Victory Friday. Syrians across the parts of the country held by the HTS-led rebel forces gathered in city squares after the first Friday prayers since the former president's departure. In a moment, we'll hear from our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who witnessed the celebrations in the city of Homs and saw Russian forces in retreat. But first, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this report from Umayyad Square in Damascus.
They came in their thousands to one of Islam's most holy sites, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, to worship together in freedom.
We are together. We are as a one person. All of us, we are as a one person.
Sunni, Shia, Alawi, Christian.
We are a one person. We are in the mosque, and I say we are the one person.
In their uprising, Friday prayers were the focus of their resistance against Assad. As today's drew to a close, the roar was deafening. This is the sound of hope and liberation, without fear of being killed by a regime. Now it's been toppled. Earlier, the leader of Syria's revolution had urged people to gather in Damascus.
I call on the people to head down to the square to express their victory without firing arms and causing panic. And after that, let's move on to build this country.
The crowds built up all day. They came to capture the moment. Many could not contain their euphoria.
I see in their face, smiling, happy inside their heart. It's unbelievable. You cannot believe like that, because this moment, we wait until 15 years, we wait this moment. All the people, they wait so much, and at last, it's come. It's come, we are free.
Abdul Rahman has lived all his life under the tyranny of the Assad family. His words and actions controlled by the regime. Not anymore.
We can say things we have never dreamt of saying before. We can do things. Never thought of cursing the ruler and cursing al-Assad.
And how does that feel for you?
It feels great. What a good time to be alive, you know?
We are all in one wedding.
It feels like a wedding for everybody.
Yes, it's like wedding.
Like Ruba, they can now dream of a better future.
And what do you want to do in the free Syria with your life?
To develop our country. To raise it in one hand, to develop it and become like other countries, like Britannia, for example.
For 50 years, this has been forbidden, spontaneously gathering on the streets, totally banned by the government without its permission. Well, there's no stopping them now.
There are huge challenges ahead, uncertainty about their new leaders and future. But whatever it brings, so many here tell you, it can never be as bad as what they've been through. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Damascus.
Well, President Assad escaped to the safety of Moscow after his fall. Russian forces had previously protected his regime, but today our cameras saw a huge convoy of their vehicles withdrawing from near the city of Homs. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports from there.
This is really quite extraordinary. On the road near Homs, an enormous convoy of Russian military vehicles heading northwest towards a Russian military base on Syria's Mediterranean coast. The convoy was unimpeded. The Russian flags clearly visible on trucks, trailers and armoured vehicles. A witness told Sky News a series of convoys were made up of over 1,000 vehicles. In this convoy, armoured fighting vehicles and troop carriers are clearly visible. These pictures suggest the Russians are withdrawing from bases near cities like Homs. And here, they were already celebrating in huge numbers the end of the Assad regime. This would be the icing on the cake. Whatever else may happen in Syria, there was a determination here that this was to be a day of celebration. In Clock Square, where some of the first spontaneous demonstrations against Bashar al-Assad began in 2011, the numbers were absolutely massive. The crowds were overseen by revolutionary fighters on rooftops, and no guns were allowed into the square. This, they said, was Homs Freedom Day, a sentiment shared by all ages and all sexes.
How are you feeling today?
Oh my God, I can't even describe this thing that's going on right now. It's a massive, huge happiness. We're all experiencing this together. We haven't felt this way in a while, like right now, you know?
Tell me how you feel today.
Very good and happy because we are free. We are free. Freedom!
There was some segregation in the crowd, but Homs is a conservative place and nobody seemed to care.
There's obviously considerable uncertainty about what the future holds for Syria, but this is an incredibly momentous day. And although there are concerns, this really is a day of celebration.
The Omar bin Al-Khattab Mosque was packed to the rafters from way before prayers. Sheikh Mahmoud Dalati was the spiritual leader of the uprising in Homs. He's returned from exile to deliver a sermon calling for unity, law and order and no retribution. Use the courts, he said. Clerics carry a lot of weight here, but they can't guarantee anything. Syria may have fundamentally changed, but nobody knows the direction it will go. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Homs.
Well, let's speak to Dominic Waghorn now, who's in Damascus for us. And Dominic, incredible images in yours and Stuart's reports of those celebratory scenes today. But there is clearly concern abroad over what happens next. Keir Starmer saying Syria needs non-sectarian government in a statement tonight. How is that prospect looking?
Well, I think it's one thing that people are looking at closely, because Syria is probably one of the most divided countries, potentially, to have been caught up in the Arab Spring revolutionary spirit. And it's got Christians, Druze, Sunni, Shia, Alawites. And what the Russians said, and the Assad regime said as well, was that if revolution did take off here, then they would be unable to stop that falling apart. And the only way to stop that was for the Russians to support the Assad. So the Syrians have got to prove them wrong. If you talk to Syrians, as we have, and Stuart has, and Alex has up north, what they seem to be saying is that they're not too concerned about that at the moment. They've gone through 13 years of civil war and conflict. They're just not going to to allow their country to go back to that, but they do expect their government to make sure that doesn't happen. But they are prepared to give this transitionary government the benefit of the doubt, and they're prepared to be patient about that. I think, if there are agents provocateurs stirring up sectarian division, that could be a challenge, and that will be a challenge for the regime, the new government here. But at the moment, things seem quite calm. They may have their work cut out later, but not at the moment, making sure things stay stable. And I think many Syrians probably will be disappointed by the tone of that statement from the G7, which they might regard as rather underwhelming, too timid and too cautious. The scenes we saw today, and Stuart saw up in Homs, were quite extraordinary in a country that has been so controlled for so long. It was a kind of eruption of enthusiasm, of liberation, and it felt euphoric and ecstatic. And I think Syrians expect the outside world to recognise that, to welcome it, to congratulate them for it, and to support them. So the Turks have been here, the Qataris already, the Germans, and I think the Syrians will be disappointed if other European countries don't follow suit and support their post-revolutionary government.
OK, Dominic, thank you. Britain's businesses waited for more than 3 months for the government to deliver its first budget. And there was more evidence today of the impact of the uncertainty that created. The economy shrank in October by 0.1%, the same figure as in September, despite analysts predicting a small rise. Growth has been close to the zero line for the past 12 months, just once reaching 0.5%. But there's been no net growth since July's general election. And last month, the main sectors of the economy, the service industry, production and construction, all fell. The Chancellor said the data was disappointing. Our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan visited 2 companies to find out why.
A bittersweet start from a government that promised to turn things around. The economy is now smaller than it was before Labour came into power. Consumers and businesses here in Leicester, where disposable income is the lowest in the UK, are still feeling the squeeze.
For the last 2 years, we are steadily coming back up. In turnover-wise, this year is the best we've ever had, and we're 25% up on last year so far. Profitability is not great with the price of chocolate and cocoa this year.
Peter's tax bill is also going up. Budgets are stretched, so he can't just pass on these costs to his customers. He's disappointed by the lack of support from the government.
I thought there was an opportunity for some real change, some kind of daring action to really shake up the economy, but they seem to be sitting on the fence.
The Christmas trading season is in full swing and the pressure is on to keep customers coming through the doors because businesses here know that things are about to get more challenging with a big increase in taxes coming down the road.
These tax rises, mainly the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, could end up harming the economy even more. But the Chancellor is holding firm. Hers is a long-term strategy driven by public investment, not a short-term sugar rush.
The numbers on GDP are disappointing, but it's not possible to turn around more than a decade of poor economic growth and stagnant living standards in just a few months.
But with another month of economic contraction, how much optimism is being destroyed along the way? Like many businesses across the UK, this aluminium manufacturing plant went into wait-and-see mode in October ahead of the budget. But they're not feeling much better having seen it.
A lot of expectation and really busy activity in July. And then I think once the government came into power, they started to signal black holes and deficits. We had the winter fuel announcement and things really deteriorated. The last 2 or 3 months has been really, really slow, back to just after COVID times. It's difficult to see how aluminium industry can be sustainable in the current economic climate.
Then there are the global headwinds, the threat of Trump's tariffs and deepening geopolitical strife. Labour promised to lift the bar on growth and living standards, but there are heavy obstacles in its way. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
America is making another attempt to deliver peace in Gaza, with an official claiming that Hamas has softened its demands in ceasefire talks. At least 33 people were killed overnight in Gaza after an Israeli strike, which its defence forces said was targeting a senior terrorist. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has this report. and a warning it contains pictures of the injuries some of the wounded suffered.
It was late on Thursday evening when the Israeli airstrike hit central Gaza. The fires were still burning, the night sky was cloudy with dust, and screams could be heard from somewhere under the remains. A bloodied man, barely able to stand, was helped from the rubble. A young girl was carried to an ambulance. It's unclear whether she survived. The dead, and Gaza health officials say that there were more than 30, were wrapped in blankets and taken to the morgues. Through the night, rescuers searched for anyone left alive. The IDF said it targeted a senior Islamic Jihad fighter and blamed secondary explosions from Palestinian weapons for damaging nearby buildings.
They are gone. We are gone. I came here to find my cousin, his wife and son under the rubble, dead, covered by human remains. Our house, the family house, everyone, we were all injured. Only my brother and I escaped.
Efforts to agree a ceasefire are progressing, but slowly. The US has sent senior officials to the region this week, hopeful something can be finalized in the coming days or weeks.
I got the sense today from the Prime Minister he's ready to do a deal. And when I go to Doha and Cairo, my goal will be to put us in a position to be able to close this deal this month, not later.
Hamas has reportedly softened its position and is no longer demanding an immediate and full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. There is some hope in sight, but the fighting hasn't stopped, and lives on both sides are still being lost. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
The family of a British man unlawfully killed in Ukraine said today he was kind-hearted and selfless, and his life was taken in a cowardly act. The coroner concluded that Daniel Burke was shot by a man who claimed to be his friend. Police don't know the whereabouts of the suspect, who they understand is an Afghan-Australian called Abdel Fattah Noreen. Our North of England correspondent Charlotte Leeming reports.
Former paratrooper Daniel Burke was in Ukraine to provide humanitarian aid, but he was killed far from the front line. More than a year after his death, a coroner in his home city of Manchester said all the evidence showed he was unlawfully killed by a comrade.
Daniel was a kind-hearted, selfless man who had spent most of his life serving the less fortunate, whether in battle or humanitarian aid. The way Dan's life was taken was a cowardly act. So many unanswered questions.
I'm shattered, I'm tired, I'm knackered.
The inquest heard Daniel died from multiple gunshot wounds, and forensic analysis showed he was unarmed and unable to defend himself.
The authorities in Ukraine have said they have a suspect they want to talk to in connection with this investigation. He's been identified as Abdel Fattah Noreen, also known as Jihadi Adam. Now, he has said to police he was with Daniel the day he died, and he also led them to his remains. But he says it was an accident and that he shot him during a training exercise. He's since fled Ukraine. No one knows where he is.
Daniel's family believe he was murdered, and ballistics investigations suggest it was impossible to accidentally fire the weapon. Police in the UK say the inquest is an important milestone in the case.
Daniel's life has ended unlawfully in the Ukraine, so it's for them, and they are leading a homicide investigation into the events. They have got a named suspect, and it's our understanding they are leading inquiries to attempt to bring the person responsible for Daniel's death to justice.
The coroner said Daniel died with bravery and valour, but was killed by cowardice and dishonour. His family now want his killer to be found and brought to justice. Charlotte Leeming, Sky News, Manchester.
A man who raped and killed an NHS worker during an attack on a park bench has been jailed for life. Mohammed Lido targeted Natalie Shotter while she was passed out in Southall Park in West London in July 2021. The attack caused her to suffer a fatal heart attack. Lido was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. The family of former England rugby star Tom Voice have paid tribute with the release of this family photo. The 43-year-old died after being swept away whilst attempting to cross a flooded river in Northumberland last weekend. His body was recovered yesterday. His wife Anna said, "Absolutely devastated and heartbroken, doesn't even describe how we feel." The French president has named centrist ally and political veteran François Bayrou as Prime Minister, replacing Michel Barnier, who lost a no-confidence vote. The left-wing Popular Front joined with the far-right National Rally to bring down Mr Barnier last week over budget disputes. François Bayrou will need to rely on moderate left and right politicians to stay in office. The Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, confirmed today that he would have the power to overrule local opposition to wind turbines as part of the government's push for green power. NIMBYs aren't the only barrier, though. One project we spoke to today said its turbines couldn't be connected to the power grid for more than a decade. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports.
Ed Miliband chose safe territory to launch his clean power plan, a factory in Hull that makes blades for wind turbines. But he knows the profusion of pylons, substations and wind farms his plan requires are not so popular everywhere.
I think it's better to be straight with people about the choices we face as a country. We face a choice of carrying on as we are and having that terrible exposure, and the cost of living crisis is still haunting so many people in our country, or to build the clean energy infrastructure that we need.
If that's politically risky, it's nothing compared to the practical challenge of delivering the plan. It calls for the current 15 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity that's taken 20 years to develop to triple to around 50 gigawatts by 2030. Onshore wind generation must double to 29 gigawatts, and solar power should also triple in scale to nearly 50 gigawatts. Then, to move all that new electricity around the country will require an overhaul of the national grid on a scale that's not been seen since it was first planned out in the 1950s. Then there's the challenge of getting all that new electricity to customers who need it. Projects like this one, this single turbine, was the only one to get a grid connection in England in 2023. There's a massive queue, more than 1,000 projects, some being told it's more than a decade before they can get a connection to the grid. The project's developer has 3 more ready to go, but no way of plugging them in.
Getting new turbines onto the grid is impossible until 2036, we've been told.
2036?
Yeah.
A major part of the new plan is urgently prioritising this grid queue, but local opposition to unsightly net zero infrastructure won't go away. It's why the government favours community-owned projects like this one, where profits go to local people.
Community energy is at the heart of the energy system. This is something that brings long-term benefit well after the turbine's been put there. That could be replicated 100 times over hundreds of times over across the country.
The Clean Power Plan will be a major test of Keir Starmer's promise to get Britain building again, but also of his political stomach for when it hits the inevitable obstacles and opposition along the way. Tom Clark, Sky News, Bristol.
The 4 home nations have found out who stands in their way to qualify for the 2026 World Cup in North America. England, under the new leadership of Thomas Tuchel, face Serbia, Albania, Latvia and Andorra. The toughest challenge for Scotland, looking to reach their first World Cup since 1998, is likely to come from either Portugal or Denmark. Wales are hoping to make it to back-to-back World Cups for the first time. Belgium, the top-ranked team in their group. While Northern Ireland's strongest opposition will be the winners of the Nations League quarter-final between Germany and Italy. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface, and the economist and leader writer for The Times, Sebastian Payne. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on our lead story on the front of the Daily Mail, saying Prince Andrew has known China's spy for 10 years. We'll be right back. Do stay with us.
Today Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Prince Andrew's office says he ceased all contact with a man alleged to be a Chinese spy after taking advice from the government. There have been celebrations on the streets of Syria to mark the first Friday since the fall of President Assad. And the Chancellor says she is disappointed after the latest figures show the UK economy shrank in October. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the columnist and leader writer for The Times, Sebastian Payne. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Mail claims that Prince Andrew knew the man barred from entering the UK over concerns he was a Chinese spy for 10 years before he was told the man might be suspicious. The Times hears the man was invited to a reception at Buckingham Palace before he fell under suspicion. The Mirror calls the situation a China crisis. The Financial Times describes the latest GDP figures as a blow to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. They show the economy shrank by 0.1% in October. The Express reports that the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has reacted to those figures by accusing Labour of crashing the economy. The Eye carries warnings about kitchen gadgets violating people's privacy, including air fryers recording conversations. And following Kemi Badenoch's rant about sandwiches, the Star says the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, has stuck up for them. That's despite him once being part of an unflattering photo involving a bacon butty. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Sebastian Payne. Welcome to both of you. And I'll just give you a heads up that you're going to be doing the majority of the talking because, as you can hear, my voice is leaving me rapidly.
It's always a challenge for us.
I'm sure you'll manage. Let's start with the Mail. And the front page story headline there, Andrew has known China spy for 10 years. Met him in 2012 and only dropped him after he was rumbled. I think they mean that the spy was rumbled. Alleged spy, we have to say. Susie.
Yeah. Just go back a little bit even before then. It was 2010 that the Duke of York was pictured walking in a Central Park in New York with convicted paedophile then, Jeffrey Epstein. It was a few months after that, in early 2011, he was asked to step down in his role as trade envoy. Into this, the alleged spy then seems to have somehow been introduced to Prince Andrew after all that. There's been a 10-year period in which they have socialised with each other and worked with each other, and he has been providing some kind of business advice and been a confidant of some sort to the Prince. And in 2019, after that disastrous Panorama interview, he stepped down from pitch at Palace, which was the sort of the business Dragon's Den type scheme he sort of set up for himself after he was asked to stop being a trade envoy because he was just too embarrassing. And everyone sort of let him get on with the pitch at Palace thing because it wasn't quite as bad. And it seems possible that this alleged spy was somehow involved offering advice or somehow or another with that scheme. But, you know, it's now... That was 2019, and now we're on 2024. And it's taken this long, firstly, for the security services to find out this chap was someone they didn't want in the country, which is they've got questions to ask. But also, even after 2019, the Prince was still inviting this person to his birthday party in 2020. He was arrested at the airport and had his phone seized by the security service in 2021. But it wasn't until a year later, in 2022, that the Prince finally said, I've listened to advice now and I'm going to stop talking to him. There are a load of questions to be answered about who was doing what, when and why, what this chap was investing in, where the money was coming from and where it was going to, whether any of it ended up somewhere it shouldn't have done, and what the security services knew and what Andrew knew and when they all knew this, because there's so many holes in that timeline, I could just sit here and pull it apart all night.
Sebastian, uncharacteristically, because obviously Prince Andrew has sort of withdrawn from public life, he has released a statement and saying that he'd ceased all contact with this supposed spy after receiving advice from officials.
Yes, and it is on the front page of The Times tomorrow, where we're reporting that this alleged spy not only had his contacts, but had made visits to Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace and Windsor Castle for events, and including a birthday at the Royal Lodge for Prince Andrew as well. So the statement you mentioned that was released it doesn't really answer a lot of the questions Susie has just raised, because it doesn't say who raised the concerns, when these concerns were raised, and what concerns were raised.
And why they arrested him in 2021 and looked at his phone. What was the reason that made them think, hello, let's lift you?
And, I mean, you know, the statement goes on to say the Duke met with the individual through official channels with nothing of a sensitive nature ever discussed. He is unable to comment further on matters relating to national security. Now, I mean, that's all fine and dandy saying that, but the fact is this is once again absolutely appalling judgment by Prince Andrew that, as you mentioned, through the whole Jeffrey Epstein business, we saw that. We've seen it through many other relationships he's had over the years. And this one's just another embarrassment for the royal family. And the King has, I think, made quite clear his views on his brother and has sort of tried to excommunicate him. You know, he has. No, he has, as much as possible. And I think the question is what happens now. I would be very surprised to see if we see Prince Andrew walking on Christmas Day with the royal family to the traditional service, which he's still done, despite the fact he's not been a working royal for some time. But there's one other point on this story that's worth just considering, and that is the fact about how all this came to light, which was through court documents. And many campaigners for transparency of the royal family have been doing freedom of information requests for a long period of time and found out absolutely nothing about Prince Andrew's finances. And recently, you know, he had his personal allowance withdrawn by the King for the Royal Lodge at Windsor, and magically has somehow found the money to stay there. We don't know who. Who are the sources? Where's this money coming from? And I think this is going to just raise more and more questions about Prince Andrew's judgment, the people he's hanging around with, and the people, crucially, who've been giving him money.
His judgment, his house costs about £400,000 a year to run. Now, that'd be a lot of money for anybody. This man's been unemployed since 2019, at least, probably 2011. Anything he's actually had paid employment for, God knows when that last was. But what his sources of funding is, when after the Queen and now King have no longer funding him, has to be something that is a matter of public interest. Because although he's not part of royal public life anymore, as this scandal shows, he is easily capable of being tricked, fooled, used, exploited, however you want to call it, to let people who may have, nefarious intent, let's say, close to people who do have the kind of secrets. Andrew certainly doesn't have any secrets, but people who do have access to government secrets that they could then get out of him. And one of the things that I think is going to move this story on next week is there was a line from the letter from the Prince's confidant, his advisor, which was quoted in the court case, saying, I want to this alleged spy, saying, I hope you are aware of how important you are and how high up the tree you are. Not just for my principal, but for everyone in his family. So who else in the royal family has this person met? Who else did Prince Andrew introduce them to? Because the whole thing we saw with Jeffrey Epstein and some of the other people that Prince Andrew has met, even though it was innocently, like the Picture Palace, the reason they want to meet him is because he can introduce him to someone else.
But there is also, you've got to be there's a difference here between access and influence, right? That obviously Prince Andrew was a way for people to gain access into the royal family. That doesn't mean these people have influence, though. That doesn't mean that this alleged spy may have had influence over the now King, then Prince of Wales. They are quite different things there, and I think we should be careful not to overstate Prince Andrew's, he's not an influential person in the royal family, hasn't been for quite a long time, even when this stuff was happening here. And that's what has to, where the story goes to next, is was there any links to other parts of the royal family? But
it doesn't really matter whether he's influential or not. If you've got someone who was spying for another country into Buckingham Palace... for anything, who knows what kind of listening device he can pop in a vase.
Sure, OK.
There's plenty of things you can do if you are a spy.
We also have these things called security services that will also...
Who didn't spot him for 10 years.
Yeah, but they will do frequent security sweeps of all these places and will make sure that happens. Yeah. But I think, again, the reason they've gone for Prince Andrew is because they clearly saw that this was someone who could get them access, if not influence, into those circles. And on the front of the Times, Tom Tugendhat, who's the former security minister, has said this is the key thing to make sure it doesn't happen, is to understand access and influence and where the difference is there. But I think there are just lots and lots of questions that no one really has the answers to on any of this. But I think any remaining links that Prince Andrew has, I mentioned the walk to the church or any of the things, I think will now be done, completely finished. And if there was a way that the King could banish him even further from the royal family, I'm sure he could. But I think they've pretty much reached the limit of what he can do.
Tom Tugendhat also saying on the front of the Times that it's important there is an urgent investigation into attempts at subversion in Buckingham Palace, and that was the point that you were making, not necessarily influence, but...
All you've got to do is get in and have a chat to someone who works there, get talking to someone, bump into them somewhere else outside. There's all sorts of ways that you can establish relationships with someone inside a building that you wouldn't otherwise have access to.
The Mirror saying that the King is truly exasperated by his brother's latest scandal.
I mean, that does not seem a surprise in any way at all. And we should also put this in the context as well of the UK's relationship with China, which has waxed and waned over the period this alleged spies access took place. And the fact is we're on a kind of rapprochement moment with China, with Keir Starmer's government, trying to ease some of those relations and focus on trading ties. But this stuff seemed to have happened at the point when everyone was withdrawing in terms of access and influence to China. So you can see why they were using this person to try and get into the top of government.
Take us to the FT, Susie, and the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is disappointed at the latest figures, the economy shrinking 2 months in a row, teetering on the brink of recession.
Yeah. So it's we've had a decrease of economic growth of 0.1%, which is minuscule. So minuscule it could be mistaken for not existing or could be zero. It's close enough. Same as if you had growth of 0.1%. We'd all be sitting there going, well, what? Why do we care? But for the Conservatives, of course, this is something that they can... It's a negative number. It's got a little black line next to it. They can use that to kick the government and say it's all down to Rachel Reeves' budget. But as it makes really clear here in the piece, this shrinking has been going on for 5 months. And that means May. It means the last 2 months of the Tory government as well. And there's only been 1 month of growth since then. And, we've heard all this stuff previously about... there are some other papers this evening who are talking about, I think it's a piece in the Express that is talking about how it all went wrong when Labour came into power and they had big growth in the new year and it's all gone downhill and it was working so well under Rishi Sunak and all the rest of it. What no one seems to have pointed out is that this time last year, last winter, Sebastian, when the weather was this bad and we were all this miserable and everyone had, probably Gillian had a cold as well, we were then looking at 3 months of sustained shrinking in the economy, which was 0.3%, 3 times worse than what we've got now. And Rishi Sunak's government was calling it a technical recession. We don't need to worry about it. This is a third of that. It's not even a recession yet. And even if it is a recession, if it turns into that, it's still not going to be as bad as it was this time last year. So,
well, I think, OK, hang on a minute. First of all, last year, global inflation was in a very different place than it is now, and lots of countries were facing teetering on recession. So it's completely pointless to refer to last year. The key point is we've just had this dreadful budget, which was meant to be an expansionary budget, which should have pumped money into the economy. You don't have the biggest ever tax rise in budget and assume it will then tip your economy in the wrong direction.
But so this shrinkage preceded the budget, though, didn't it?
It did, because obviously, as Susie alluded to, that the question about where the UK's public finances are have sat for about 9 months now, about where, how you're going to get the economy moving. But I think what you are seeing with this budget is the fact that I don't think it's had the effect it was meant to have, that it was meant to come in and to give this brave wave of confidence. We heard the grown-ups are back in charge, the sensibles are going to sort it out. And the fact is they've come in, they've bunged up all these £40 billion of tax rises, and it's done absolutely nothing to business confidence. Businesses couldn't run away fast enough from this budget. So there is an effect here. Otherwise, why would Rachel be saying it's disappointing? They're hoping things will pick up next year, and the OECD does say it expects the UK's growth to accelerate by 1.7% next year. But the big question on all this is Trump, right? Because what the UK does in this is relatively minor compared to, are we going to have a trade war? Are we going to see more tax cuts from Donald Trump? And that will have a big effect as well. And I mean, you can say it's absolutely nothing to do with the budget if you want, but I think everyone agrees that there's been a negative effect on business confidence. Like, every businessman will say that.
Everyone who can remember the last 5 minutes knows that all the previous budgets we've had recently, under governments of every stripe, have not exactly been wonderful, and that the Tories raised taxes hugely as well, that Truss's budget was hardly a kind of thing that made business delighted, and that they're talking here about, talking down the economy, and we had boosterism, and that didn't work either.
Susie and Sebastian, we must leave it there. Not one more word. We've got to take a break. Do stay with us. Coming up, jubilant scenes across Syria as people there observe the first Friday prayers since the fall of the Assad regime. We'll be discussing that next. Stay with us.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Sebastian Payne. We're going to take a look at Syria, the remarkable case of Syria, the front page of the FT. And we'll kind of zoom in, I think, on the photo. And those are the people out in celebration at the downfall of Assad, naming it Victory Friday. Just amazing scenes that we've seen throughout the day.
Yeah, and one of the most astonishing things about it to me is that on the streets of Syria, you've seen women and wives and girls and children all out there celebrating with the men. When we've had other dictators toppled across the Middle East and other countries, it's been just the men out celebrating. In Syria, there's a lot of freedom. It's obviously a horrible, brutal dictatorship, and there's loads of things they're not free to do. But women were able to go out in public without wearing a headscarf and to have some semblance of a life that had a level of equality about it. And I hope that the new regime, whatever it is and however they run the place, that doesn't alter. And that will be, I think, the test of whether they are still fundamentalist Islamists and to be worried about, or whether they are as genuinely the peace-loving, freedom fighters that they say they are.
Mm. And I think, we're seeing as well in the Times on their spread about what you're seeing is coming out from the Assad regime, that we all knew it was one of the worst dictatorships of the 20th and 21st century. But some of the coverage just has been appalling when you look at the prisons, the mass graves, how people were detained, and also the wealth of Assad as well, like, the images of his car garage, of his presidential palace. And I think there's sort of this big question mark about the future, and you see that with this question about what's going to happen in terms of Israel, the fact they're establishing this buffer zone, as they're describing it, within Syria, which seems to which some claim violates the 1974 armistice agreement. But I think the real question is what comes next. No one knows, and I think there's a lot of sort of wait and see from the West with regards to HTS, which is the force that is prescribed by the UK and the US, and what they're going to do next and how hardline they are.
It's about whether they can hold it as well, because there's so many other forces in Syria.
Yeah.
There's the Hezbollah in Lebanon, there's Iran. Obviously, they're both weakened, but you've got the Kurdish People's Party, you've got Turkish influences there, you've got Islamic State from within. If they've taken over, because Assad was very, very weak, then that's one thing, but can they hold it against all those other internal forces that are going to be trying to seize power as well?
Indeed, and will the minorities be ruled over, fairly Christians as well, Alawites, etc. Susie and Sebastian, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a look at the weather for you now. After quite a cold and grey week, the weather will turn milder but more unsettled through the weekend. For most, it's a cloudy, murky and damp evening with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. But a band of rain is pushing in from the northwest, introducing clearer skies. This rain band will continue to move south overnight, reaching central parts of Wales and the Midlands. Clear skies and scattered blustery showers will follow in the north, some wintry with a risk of icy stretches. Meanwhile, it stays cloudy and damp for southern Britain. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Prince Andrew's office says he ceased all contact with a man alleged to be a Chinese spy after taking advice from the government.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.